Hi, and welcome back. Today, I'm going to talk about how to make a stained glass leaf lampshade. Now, this is one of my favorite lampshades that I have ever made. So it's made with the basic four-sided large pieces and then four-side small sections. So first of all, I drew out a whole bunch of different shaped leaves. And I copied them onto different sheets of glass. Now, most of these videos are going to be at 4 to 8 times normal speed. This is actually at 4 times, because if I did it at normal speed, it would just take forever. So what I'm doing right now is I'm cutting out my basic leaf shapes with my ring saw. Now, of course, you can cut these out using a hand glass cutting tool, but it would take a long time and it would be more a chance that the pieces would break. So if you have a ring saw, that's the way to go. Most of this video, I know it's quite a long video. It's an hour and 12 minutes. Most of it will be cutting these pieces of glass. So I just think it's fun to watch. You can zip through them if you want to, but I like watching them. Now, when things break, like that happened, like part of the top of the leaf broke off, then I just freehand made the leaf a little bit smaller in the same maple shape that one was. Now I am going to decide where these are going to go on my lampshade after I have them all cut out. So right now I am just deciding, what leaves I like, and I'm using colors that I think are great and they'll go together nicely. See, that one broke also, so I had to either decide that I would use it on the edge of the shade, or I would, overlap another leaf. So some of them I just kept, if they broke, I just kept that shape and figured I would change it when I got to that point. The reason there's a line down the middle of all of these is at one point I was thinking I would cut them in half to have half the leaf one color and half another color. I actually never did that because I think it would have gotten even busier than the lampshade is. So I ended up just washing off those marks. I used Mark Stay on top of my Sharpie marks, marker marks to try to keep it from washing away when I was cutting, which did work pretty good. Because the water from the saw does make it so that the lines disappear at times. When I'm cutting things out of glass, I like to cut out the larger pieces. Like right now I'm doing the large side of the leaf, and then I will do the little details, because that way I'll have a lot to hang on to when I'm working. But there are times when I'll do like the little decoration along a side of something and then cut the rest of it out. But for this particular project, I wanted to separate that leaf from the large one so that it's easier to handle. And that was just the way that I did it, so that I cut the big part off first, and then I'm just finishing off the rest of the leaf. Now, of course, your saw will only give you so much space between the saw blade itself and the back of the saw. So you can only make it so big before you have to cut it, by hand or some other way. Now all of these flat pieces of leaves were then foiled with 7/32 inch black backed copper foil. Now I like to use the black backed because then if any of the glass that I'm using happens to be too transparent so that the light shines through and you can see the back of the copper of the foil, I don't want to see that shiny copper color. I want to see blackness. I then took my leaves and I placed them in different areas of my lamp frame. Now what I did was I started off with a lampshade that I got at Goodwill, I think. But you can use new lampshades, but I usually like to try to find used ones that I then take all the covering off of, and then I cover all of the metal parts of it with foil. So this way my solder will stick to it, because most of the time the metal that is used to make a lampshade or other metal object you might buy is made out of a metal alloy that will not accept solder very easily. And we want our solder to be accepted without a lot of pain. You don't want to have to use really high heat because that would ruin the whole effect. So you just want to cover it with foil first, and then you can solder your pieces to it. Yes, I'm wearing gloves. These happen to be silicone gloves. If you wear gloves, especially silicone ones, it helps dissipate the heat so you don't burn your hands as much, and you don't get the chemicals like the flux on your hands, which can kind of dry out your hands. And some of the chemicals we use are not really very good for you anyway. So I have all these different leaf shapes, and I'm placing them on the different parts of the shade itself. As I said, there's 4 big areas and there are 4 small areas of this frame. And so I need to figure out, what's best to do. After I placed most of them, I decided I wanted to make some of them, to have them outlined with some blobs. So these are just kind of small blobs. Some of them are only 10 millimeters in diameter, and some go up to 14 millimeters. So it really depends on what you have. I wanted to use the colors of the reds, oranges, into the greens. I'm keeping away from any purples or blues. You usually want to limit yourself somewhat in your projects. So, that's the color palette that I decided to go with. So I have these little domed, they're kind of like cabochons, but they're colored, but they are transparent. And I foiled them. Now, when I foil small objects, I can't use the whole thickness of the 7/32 inch foil because it would encroach upon the shape of the circle too much. So I cut it down lengthwise, the foil. I cut it down to like usually a quarter of the width. So it's only a couple millimeters in width, and then I foil those. And I do have videos on foiling different objects, because I often do this, that I will use smaller objects than a lot of people use when they do stained glass. And I like to just foil the outside so that, the glass itself isn't like covered with a lot of foil. Now, when you do this, you have the problem of if you heat it up too much, the foil will actually no longer stick to the glass. So you want to just heat it up just a little bit. You don't want to heat up the whole circle at a time. And yeah, if it does fall out and come loose, you will have to either just put a new one in the space that sometimes doesn't work because obviously the foil might still be there. So you might have to heat it up and actually get that old foil off in that area and then put a whole new one on. Oops, look, that happened, and I'm taking the piece of the old foil off. And I can just wash that glass circle and use it and then foil it and use it again. So it's not like you you have to throw something away, but it's unfortunate when that happens. Now, normally when you are doing stained glass, the foil is just a surface to have the solder stick to. So you're actually sandwiching the glass between solder. So that's really what's holding it together is the solder. You're not expecting the foiling to hold it together. You notice I have that stack of silicone washers, and those are really, really handy. They come in a few different sizes, and they help balance things when needed to help hold them where you want to. Because that's often the tricky part and the time-consuming part in using small pieces like this is trying to hold them exactly where you want to. So anyways, what I was saying about the solder is actually like sandwiching your glass, so that's what makes it really strong. You're not expecting the foil to hold your glass together when in a finished piece. But back to these little pieces, the solder doesn't really wrap around the piece of glass very much because of the fact that you didn't give it that foil that was wrapped around it. So you're kind of relying on the stickiness of the foil itself to actually do a lot of the holding it together. So you want to really make sure that you burnish it down well when you do foil your project so that they're really stuck on. And you also don't want to heat up your piece of glass too much because it'll just heat up the foil too much and pop out. This is one way I make a new pattern for a space I want to fill in. So you can put your piece of glass right in place and then just draw it out and cut it. Now you may have to adjust it before it, might not fit perfectly. So you might have to go back to your saw and cut it a few more times to make it fit perfectly. Because this lampshade isn't flat, the different sections of the lampshade are not flat, then you're not going to be able to draw out your design and then make the whole section and pop it in. You're going to have to go and design it kind of and create the pattern as you go. I also, at the end, I do go over and smooth out a lot of the solder so that it's not quite so clumpy that it looks right now. When you're working with a three-dimensional object like this, it's really important to try to hold it all level while you're working, and that can be kind of tricky. Now, right now, I'm actually soldering the back side of this. And yeah, there are some gaps, as you see, between my piece of glass and especially the circles, the red circles. And I will have to fill those little gaps with solder. And again, if you want to fill something with solder, you will have to like kind of plop the solder in and don't work on one area exclusively a lot, because if you heat it up too much, bad things will happen. So I kind of like plop some extra solder in places. Obviously, if after I cut out my piece of glass, if it really doesn't fit very well, I will just start over. but I kind of don't expect it to be perfect because they never are completely perfect. What I'm getting on the table right there is old pieces of solder that I'm just heating up and using again. Now this is a section of a leaf that kind of broke while I was doing it, but I still loved it so much that I decided to keep that leaf shape. Now this pen that I'm using is not working very well, as you can see. Um, I got these long nibbed markers to try to reach around things, but sometimes they weren't working as well as I'd like. That right there was just a fine point Sharpie marker, which seemed to work very nicely. Now I'm seeing if it's going to fit correctly in place, and it's a little bit too long at the bottom, so I will have to cut the bottom off there, and that's okay. And then I come back and make sure it fits before I start to solder it. I usually tack things in place and then go around the whole thing. And you can see that the leaf, the yellowish leaf that I'm soldering this one to, has been tinned most of the way around. I kind of go back and tin things. It is kind of nice to have it already tinned before you start attaching the next one to it, but it's not essential, but it does make things a little bit easier to solder. And yeah, here again, there are some gaps between the two leaves there that I'm going to have to fill with solder. That's why it's really important when you're foiling things that you center the foil nicely, because if you end up having it like too fat in one area, it's going to show when you're done that the lines are, really fat in one area and really thin in another. And because I know that there's probably going to be some gaps here, I want to have as thin a line, or as consistent, I should say, a line between the leaves as I can get. Yeah, see, that was a little bit of tinning on the edge there. Because, yeah, I'm going to have to fill in the other areas. Now, of course, you could make a lampshade if you wanted to, or any stained glass project, and have it not completely filled in. You could have gaps between objects and just have the light go between them. But I wanted to have it all filled in. So I need to fill in all of these spaces around the leaves with glass. And I want the spaces to be varied. I don't want to have, the same pattern next to the same pattern. Luckily, I have a bunch of different shades of glass that are working for this. And now, as you can see, because the lampshade's not flat, I can't hold this piece of glass completely flat to where I want to draw. So there are times when I make patterns this way. So I'm using a piece of paper to make a pattern. So I'm holding it as flat as I can, and then I'm using my marker and drawing out the shape. And now I'm cutting it out of paper. Now I have at times cut it out of sticky paper and stuck the sticky paper to the glass and did it that way. It's a little bit of a pain to get the stickiness to come off the glass, but it does hold the pattern completely, where you wanted it to go. So that's one way to do it. Or you could do what I'm doing on this project, and I'm actually going to now outline figure out where on the glass I want to put it, and then I'm going to outline it with my marker again. Now, you have to remember how you drew it to see if you should, should I cut inside the line on my saw, or should I cut outside or right on it? And that, of course, depends on how you went about drawing your pattern to begin with. Now, because these leaves are going, they're going in front and behind each other, when I make a pattern, I sometimes can figure out how I want to end the free end, how I want that to end, or sometimes I will cut a piece of glass and then decide how it looks afterwards. So it really depends on, what the piece is, and maybe when I now look for a piece of glass to use, I won't have enough of that color. And so, like, for this time, I decided I would take that pattern and make it into 2 pieces. So that was kind of handy. So I made one big pattern and cut it in half and kind of made 2 different leaves for that. I have made some projects where the glass is almost overlapping the metal frame. This particular one, I'm going inside the frame. Really, depends on what you want it to look like, obviously. Yeah, I didn't show you this whole project because this lampshade took a few weeks. Yeah, it took a long time to make, mainly because each piece you have to make the pattern for each one individually. I mean, making the original leaves themselves didn't take that long, but filling in the spaces between them took a lot of time. Now, of course, because the sides of this shade are not flat, you can't use one piece of glass for the whole thing anyway, because the glass doesn't bend like that. So when you're doing your patterns, you may make a pattern that goes in a certain space that once you cut the glass, it just doesn't work because of the tilt of the shade or the angle. That brownish leaf on the right side of the image there was about as big as one could get for this particular shade, and have it fit okay and with the bend of the shade. I did end up, and I'll show at the end of this video, I did end up putting pieces of copper along the main seams to smooth out those the unevenness that the main seam had. Before you foil each piece, and I might not have showed you all the time, but it's really a good idea to make sure that it fits, especially if it's a really odd piece like these that are a little bit tricky, because you don't want to foil it and then find out that it just didn't fit and then have to go back to the drawing board. So yeah, I'm using a combination of old pieces of solder that just happens to be on my table at this time, or I actually keep like a little cup full when I'm done with my projects, and or using a new piece like this that I'm holding. But when they get close to the end, they get a little hot, and then I either have to use tweezers to hold the piece of solder, or just give up on that. I do have a video where I melt the extra pieces of solder to form coils of solder, so it's easier to use. Because if you have a lot of little pieces of solder, it's a little tricky to reuse them as they are. So it's sometimes better to just remelt them and into a rod to use. So I have a video of how I made a silicone mold to be able to melt my solder into coils to use. So right now I'm back soldering this particular area. The inside of projects, the back side of the projects, I'm not overly worried if the solder's not really smooth. I'm really doing it as extra strength. So I won't really spend a lot of time when I'm done smoothing out the inside. It's just doing the back side. There might be gaps in the between the glass that need to be filled, or is just doing it for extra strength is always a good idea. So that's getting back to that one that I worked on earlier, and doing those little pieces at the bottom, which I decided to do in the same color that I used on the left side, so it kind of looks like there was a yellow leaf, kind of an orange yellow leaf behind that colorful one. Yeah, so I do use my tweezers to hold the little pieces of solder, um, so I don't get burned. Yeah, and those are silicone tip tweezers, which are very handy because the solder will not stick to them. Because I used to use, when I started out, I had regular tweezers, and then sometimes they get too hot, and you'd end up with a soldered tweezer, and that's not really what you want. And then the tweezers themselves would get hot, and that's not fun. Um, but if you have silicone tip tweezers, they don't get hot, and the solder won't stick to them. So that's really handy. And I've used the same silicone tip tweezers on a lot of projects, and they haven't deteriorated at all. So that's really cool. So here again, going and doing the back side of those particular pieces of glass that I just attached. Yeah, when your project is pretty level, you can kind of drop pieces of scrap solder and then just kind of move them around. So right now I'm foiling this particular piece of glass. I don't really use one of those roller things. At least I haven't yet to fold over the piece of glass. I just kind of center it by eyeball and then just fold them over and then burnish them by hand. And it's just after you've foiled stuff for a while, it's pretty easy to line up foil and get it pretty darn centered. You do want to overlap at the where the two pieces meet a little bit. So after you have it all smoothed down, then you're ready to attach it. Now, I've gotten a lot of my glass from a local Hobby Lobby store, and I have ordered some from Amazon and other glass suppliers. I don't have a glass supplier near where I live, so I really the only way that I can get glass, is to go to the Hobby Lobby or do it online. I wish I had a place that I could just go and look at the different pieces, physically, um, besides Hobby Lobby, but I just don't have a place like that nearby. That white spoolie thing on the right side there that I'm using to prop, I guess there's one on the left too, that I'm using to prop up my project when I'm working, those are actually the spools left over from spools of solder. So I do keep my spools, well, not all of them probably, but a lot of them, to use to help hold things where I need to hold them. Because you notice that the way in the back, that's just resting right on my work surface. And then the front here, I have them on the spools. And that's because of the curve of the shade itself makes it so that was really a handy way to hold it at the time. So as I said, after you have cut your pattern, whether you just put your glass behind it and drew it or you cut it out of paper, you do want to check it before you actually cut your glass, and then you want to check the glass, make sure that fits before you start soldering. Now for this one, I was using larger green circles, as you can see, and I really liked that, except it left these gaps, as you can see, between the circles and that light yellow leaf. And so I had to fill all those in. So yeah, when you're working, if you want it to be completely filled in, like in this project, the more gaps you leave yourself, the smaller the gaps, it just adds to the time it's going to take to fill all those little gaps in. I've used a bunch of different solders, 60/40 tin lid solder. I haven't decided on which one I really like the best. So the jury's still open on that. So in the comments, if you have a favorite solder that you think I should try, I'd love to hear it. I usually use gel flux, um, but I'm not completely sold on that either. I'm not completely sold on the correct temperature to use on these projects of mine. And I know that different temperature for different solder, blah, 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 is a important, but and doing three-dimensional projects, which most of mine are, is a little bit different than flat solder. There's just so many variables in getting the look that really is ideal. My projects are more into the shape of the glass and the shape of the project itself than the actual soldered seam. I don't really care, I guess, as much about the solder being absolutely so perfect that it looks like a machine did it, as much as the creativity of the pieces of glass and the shape and the design of the project. You can see this is quite a small little piece I had to fit in there between that slightly bluish piece of glass. That bluish piece of glass was interesting because one end of the glass is not blue at all. It's very varied. Because as I said earlier, I'm not really using blues in this project, but this particular piece of glass, I really like it. And it varies from the more orange, green, and yellows to going into a little bit of the blues at this end. Yeah, I'm doing this right under my light, and that's why it's kind of pretty to see the pieces as they're plopped in place. It's almost like puzzle pieces. Yeah, so if I can get it to fit in there just right so I can tack it in place, then I can do the rest of the outline. I do like the flux that is more of the thicker type of flux as opposed to the liquid stuff, just because it doesn't run off your project immediately. But I don't think that the solder spreads as smoothly when you use the gel flux as opposed to a liquid flux. So that's why I'm not really convinced that I've found my favorite combination yet. And I really love that piece of glass on the right side there with the red streaks through it, the red and the green. That's one of my favorite leaves. This shade, probably if I did it all at once with pretty steady working on it, I think it probably would have taken a couple weeks. Which is why I'm only showing you little bits here and there, because you don't want to sit here for 2 weeks probably watching this whole project. So remember, this is sped up 8 times the normal speed most of this is. Sometimes it's been at 4 times. But yeah, so just the little parts that I am showing you would have taken a lot longer if to show you. If you have a gap that's a little bit too big, like this one right here that I'm filling, if you kind of drop solder into it and wait a sec and then drop it again, it will fill the spaces. Obviously, you don't want to do that if you don't like the look that you end up getting, because you will end up having a wider line in that area. So if that really bothers you, then you're going to want to recut your piece of glass. So I'm using a scrap of paper right there, holding it in place, and then drawing yet another pattern. Now you can tell that when I draw a pattern like this, it will, there's that little gap between the marker line and the actual, the actual piece of glass. And I will take that in consideration when I am transferring the pattern to my glass and then when I am actually cutting out the glass. And glass doesn't bend, so if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. You know, you can't, the only thing that you have the give on is if there's an extra piece of solder, you can melt that piece of solder off, or if it's the foil is bunched up a little bit, you might be able to squish the foil down a little to make something fit. But besides that, if you try to force it in, it's just going to break the glass, and that's not what you're going to want. There's another way you could do it is put light behind your project and then draw on top of, like right there. See, I'm putting light behind it, and I'm using the light to actually show me where I can draw my pattern. And yeah, you're still going to want to make sure that it does, in fact, fit the way you want it to before you cut it. Because as you can see, there's a little bit of adjustment I needed to do to the pattern to make the pattern correct. And I have at times, you know, started off with a whole new pattern. Sometimes I've like glued on another piece of paper to if it's too small. Right now I am redrawing areas that need a little bit more cutting. I'm showing you right now that I have beveled the edge of the glass with either use your ring saw or your grinder because of this area of the lampshade. I just couldn't get a piece to lie flat in that crack without it being beveled. Yeah, sometimes it's just tricky to get it to fit in, even though you think that the pattern should work fine. But that's why I ended up beveling that one. So I held my glass at an angle to my saw and just kind of sawed off a section. I've also done this with the grinding wheel itself and grinded off a little bit of glass. Because if I had made that even smaller along the left side there, it would have been like more of a gap there. And I just didn't want to go even a bigger gap than I already had. So that's why the bevel came into play. Of course, on a lot of projects, you could just wait until you have the whole project done and then do this back soldering. Um, and I often do it that way. But I guess with this project, I just wanted to psychologically know that I finished an area. You know, sometimes with doing these three-dimensional projects, getting into the project to do the back soldering can be difficult. This one, not quite so much because it is quite a large lamp. Yeah, you can see that time I kind of just dropped the piece of solder and then just kind of moved it around as it was melting. So pieces like this, it would be really hard to do by hand. The ring saw just really allows you much more versatility in what you want to cut. And obviously this one's not really fitting exactly, so I have to figure out where it's not fitting and go back and saw a little bit more. And sometimes I have to go back 3 or 4 times to get it to fit perfectly, or as close to perfectly as I can get. And you can see on the left there that piece is getting really quite thin. But it was either, put glass there or have to fill that whole piece in with solder. So I really had to put a piece of glass there because I didn't want that to be completely covered in solder. At least having a slight slice of glass there will look better. This is when I'm getting to those really small pieces around those green globs that I was talking about. Yeah, there's Those green globs were flat. Those green circles, they weren't domed like some of them. Because I wanted a variety. Because, I mean, they're leaves. They're all different, from all different trees. You know, leaves aren't all from the same tree. I didn't make like a maple leaf or, you know, a certain type of leaf. I wanted to have all different shapes of leaves. So I wanted the glass colors to be different shapes and the actual circle designs that I put around them to be different. So I had one bunch of circles were kind of brownish, some were yellow, some were more golden, I had green, I had red. So every plane of my lampshade had a different color bunch of circles, only around one object. Now I bought 2 coils of flat, very bendable copper. I think it was 8 millimeters wide and 12 millimeters wide. And the idea is I wanted to cover these seams because where the glass met the corners, it didn't come out terribly smooth. So I wanted to cover up the corners and just kind of smooth out that look. I didn't want them to be perfectly smooth because none of my project's perfectly smooth. But I did want to get rid of that look of having like 3 different planes all meeting together. So I wanted it to be somewhat smooth. So I decided I would cover the main ribs, like 8 ribs on this shade, and then I would also use the wider of the copper that I bought and bend it around the base, because the base right around the rim, it didn't end up being terribly smooth. It was kind of globby because it's been foiled and then soldered with many different pieces. It just was not looking very, very consistent. I wanted it to be a little bit smoother, a little bit more even. So I bent it around the base also. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just trying to solder this down to actually hold it in place and solder the edges. As you can see, I didn't want to have like gaps where the copper met the lamp itself. I wanted to not have any gaps. And I think it did do what I wanted it to do. I think it really kind of evened out the ribs of the lampshade without making it look like it was a completely different substance. I didn't want it to look, you know, really fake and not blend in with the rest of the solder. So wherever the soldered glass met the new rib that I put on, I went around and kind of blended the solder to it. So what I'm showing right here is I have that rib wrapped along the bottom, and I am also right now soldering one of the ones that went up and soldering the side of one of the ribs. And you can get copper in different widths and different thicknesses. I didn't want the thickness to be, as thin as foil, because that would, I could have used foil, but it doesn't really take to this type of situation as well. You can't really stick foil on top of a soldered object and then expect the solder you put on top of it to end up being smooth. It pretty much will make the foil you put on will kind of come up. But using this pure copper strips, since it's copper, it doesn't rely on any stickiness. It's going to allow you to solder to each side and the face of it. So the tricky thing is to hold it in place, and then, and yeah, it gets hot because yeah, it's copper. So I'm using a piece of silicone washer right there under my thumb because it gets really, really hot, and I needed to try to hold that somehow. And I couldn't hold it with pliers. They weren't really working using my tweezers. So I came up with this, kind of like using that to help support. Now you may decide you want to use those strips of copper that you can get for different projects. So I had to actually unattach it a little bit and then use tweezers to get this end down. My red washer idea was great to get some of it tacked down toward the top, but then I had to straighten it out at the bottom again because it didn't quite do what I wanted it to do. Now remember, wherever the solder from my glass met the new strip of copper, I wanted to kind of blend those together. I did not end up wrapping anything around the top of the lamp. I think by the time I got to the top of the lampshade, I didn't have as many pieces meet there because it was such a smaller section. Right now I have the wider of the copper strips that I got, and I'm attaching them along the bottom rim and soldering into the design that I've already made. And I'm using the pliers as I go to hold it smooth and to hold it in place while I did the soldering. I also needed to coat all of this copper with solder. I'm using my pliers and I'm bending that the strip of copper around the bottom rim of my lampshade. And no, it didn't go all the way around to to the glass itself again because I didn't get it that wide. I guess I could have bought even wider stuff, but it did bend around enough to do what I needed. I wanted the outside visible part that one would see to have a more smooth, consistent look than it had before. And the reason why I'm coating everything in solder is I'm going to patina this afterwards when I'm completely done. When I'm completely done, I'm going to wash this thoroughly and scrub it. I usually use Dawn dishwashing soap to help clean it, and then I scrub the all the solder and get it as clean as possible. And then because it's winter out, I did not want to go outside to do the patinaing. So this time I ended up putting it in my bathtub and spraying patina inside a black plastic bag, which I will show in a moment. And this is what I used. I used a spray bottle and Novacon black patina, and I put my lampshade inside a black plastic bag to protect everything with an old towel underneath so I didn't break my shade. And then I sprayed and sprayed and sprayed and turned it and sprayed and sprayed and sprayed. And then I used a chemical paintbrush and spread around the dregs at the bottom of the plastic bag. I used those to spread the rest of the like the inside areas that I missed. And yes, you have to use protective equipment when you use patina. Like, you want to have ventilation and you want to wear gloves. You do not want to get it on you. It's not good for you at all. I'm using the black patina for this, so basically all the solder that was silver is going to be black. So after I get it all on, and using a spray bottle and using a paintbrush, you just really want to get all the different sides of your solder. So if there's any irregularities of your solder, you'll want to so the paintbrush gets it in all different areas. Yeah, if you did like a flat project and you had beautiful smooth solder beads, then it would be much easier to patina it because it would be so smooth. So yeah, that's a little picture of me spraying the outside of it. So going different directions with the paintbrush and with the spray, you can get it so that all the different directions of your solder seams are affected and black. Now, when I was all done with my lamp, I put it together, and it's just so top heavy that I was kind of concerned that it might fall over, and I really, really don't want it to fall over. So I constructed a base out of wood, 2 rings of wood with a weight on the inside, and then I bought these elephant, like little knobs, they're little handles, and they were black, so I had to give them a little bit of color so you could see them. And the trunks of the elephants are holding the bottom of the lamp to the base that I made, so that holds it from tipping. And those are the two different sides of the shade when it was done. And I just really think this was very pretty. And this is the whole lamp when it's done. It has like a little shelf, and that's the top. And so it sits beside a couch. It's a floor lamp. Well, thank you for watching. I hope this inspires you to make some irregularly shaped creation. A one-of-a-kind piece of art. And it was fun and well worth it. Thanks again. Bye-bye.